My name is Helen Crawford, and the day my daughter-in-law's parents sneered at me inside Associated Bank was the day I realized some people only see what's on the surface until the truth knocks the wind out of them. I can still see their faces frozen mid-smirk as the banker said the words they never expected to hear. No, she's not borrowing. She owns the $1.2 million account. Their mouths shut faster than a storm window in January, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small in their presence. I felt steady. I felt seen. But that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It came after years of letting their comments roll off me like sleet, hitting the old siding on my house pretending I didn't feel the sting. I've lived in Janesville, Wisconsin my entire life. This town may not be fancy, but it's honest. It's where people still shovel their neighbors' sidewalks and bring hot dish to funerals. It's where my late husband, Mark, and I built our little life board by board, paycheck by paycheck, renovating old homes around town and saving every spare dime we could. We didn't brag. We didn't dress fancy. And apparently, that was all the Whitfields needed to decide I wasn't worth much. The morning at the bank started like any other. I woke up to the sound of the furnace humming against the Wisconsin cold, pulled on my old navy sweater, and scraped frost off my car windows before driving into town. I just needed to update some paperwork on my account. A simple errand. I parked in the small lot beside the bank, noticing the slush that hadn't melted from last week's snowstorm. I walked in, nodded to the security guard who always held the door for me, and took my place in line. I didn't expect to see them, the Whitfields, Abigail's parents, the kind of people who wear expensive coats that never seem to catch snowflakes and who talk like the whole world should be grateful they're visiting it. They lived up in Brookfield, but every now and then they came down to see Abigail and Michael. I didn't turn around when I heard their voices behind me. I knew the sound too well, always a little too loud, as if every sentence needed an audience. Helen, Mrs. Whitfield, said, her voice lifting, as though she'd found a stray cat. "What on earth are you doing here? Applying for a loan?" She smiled wide, but her eyes flicked over my coat, my shoes, my purse. She wasn't asking. She was judging. Before I could answer, her husband chuckled. "Nothing wrong with borrowing, I suppose. Fixing up that old house of yours, maybe." I'd heard comments like that for years, at Thanksgiving dinners, at birthday gatherings, at church potlucks where they showed up overdressed and left early. They always saw me as the poor mother-in-law clinging to my old life and my old home. I used to let it roll off for Michael's sake, for peace. But something inside me tightened that morning. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was time. I opened my mouth to respond, but I didn't need to. The banker. A young woman named Kara, who always remembered my name, stepped forward with a folder in her hands. "Mrs. Crawford," she said warmly, "I've prepared the paperwork for your $1.2 million account. If you'd like, we can go over the interest changes together." Silence. Actual, heavy silence. I watched their expressions drop like the temperature outside. Mrs. Whitfield blinked so fast, she looked like she had snowflakes stuck in her lashes. Her husband's mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. "Oh," Mrs. Whitfield managed finally. "I didn't realize." Of course she didn't. They never asked. They never cared. They had built an entire image of me in their minds, and that image didn't include me owning more money than the country club fees they bragged about. Kara guided me toward her desk, and I walked past the Whitfields with a polite smile. Not smug, not triumphant, just steady. It was the first time I'd ever seen them look small, and the strangest part was I didn't feel bigger. I just felt free. We went over the documents, talked about rates, and scheduled a follow-up appointment. All the while, I felt the Whitfields' eyes at my back like cold wind. When I finally walked out of the bank, the winter sun was brighter than I expected, brighter than it had been in months. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the heater warm my hands, and realized something that both comforted and scared me at the same time. That moment inside the bank wasn't revenge. It was a beginning. Because once people like the Whitfields see a glimpse of money, they don't stay quiet. They circle, they plan, and they smile even wider. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my breath steadied. Something told me the events of that morning were about to unravel into something bigger, something that would test loyalty, dignity, and the boundaries of family. And I was right. I didn't drive straight home after leaving the bank. Instead, I parked along the Riverwalk near Court Street and watched the sheets of thin ice drift along the Rock River. The cold was sharp but familiar. One of those Wisconsin mornings where the sun shines but the air bites. I sat quietly, letting the heater run, thinking about the look on the Whitfields' faces. It wasn't just surprise. It was something closer to disbelief, or maybe annoyance. As if the truth of my bank account had inconvenienced a story they'd been telling themselves for years. The thing about people like them is that they don't just dislike being wrong, they hate it. Still, as I sat there watching the river, I felt a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with the years before. They hadn't always looked down on me, not at first. When Abigail and Michael began dating, I had hope. She was polite, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in being part of our family. But little by little, the cracks showed. A comment here, a sigh there, a glance at my worn kitchen countertops, like they offended her. And then her parents entered the picture, and everything changed. I remember the first time I met them at a small dinner Michael arranged. I made my best pot roast slow-cooked all day, the way Mark used to like it. I had cleaned the house top to bottom. I even set out the good plates, the ones with the blue edge I'd bought on our 20th anniversary. But the moment they stepped inside, I knew. I could feel their eyes scanning everything. The old oak floors Mark refinished himself. The mismatched chairs, the family photos from years of Wisconsin bike trails and lake trips. "It's cozy," Mrs. Whitfield had said, in a tone that could freeze soup. From then on, the judgments came quietly but consistently. When we picked a modest venue for the wedding, they insisted on upgrading it. When I helped Abigail choose flowers, her mother replaced all my suggestions with more expensive options. At the rehearsal dinner, I overheard Mr. Whitfield telling one of his co-workers Michael comes from humble roots, but we'll bring him up. Humble roots. As though Mark and I had been nothing more than soil for them to scrape off their shoes. I had spent 40 years working beside my husband, hauling lumber, sanding floors, and stretching every paycheck to make sure our son never lacked for anything. Humble wasn't the right word. Honest was. When Mark died 10 years ago, I kept the business going for a while, long enough to finish the projects we'd promised. After that, I sold the equipment, paid off the house, and put everything into savings and long-term investments. I didn't feel the need to explain any of that to Abigail or her parents. What mattered was that Michael knew who we were and how hard we worked. But sometimes I wondered if my silence had paved the way for others to speak over me. Sitting in my car by the river, I thought back to times when Abigail had made small comments that stung more deeply than she realized. Like the Christmas, she gifted me an expensive scarf and said, "Maybe this will help you dress a little more modern." Or the time she told Michael right in front of me, "Your mom lives so simply. It's admirable, I guess." Her mother, of course, was far less subtle. I'll never forget the day she visited my house for the first time after the wedding. She walked through each room like she was appraising damage. "You've lived here how long?" she asked. 38 years, I replied proudly. She blinked. "And never thought about updating." I nearly laughed. The kitchen had been remodeled twice by Mark's own hands. The cabinets didn't match the glossy magazine images she preferred, but they were made of solid oak and memories, and they'd last longer than any of the flimsy modern stuff. What they never understood, what people like them rarely do, is that money doesn't create value. Work does. Time does. Love does. But they only saw surfaces, and I didn't fit theirs. As the river drifted by, I thought about Michael. He didn't inherit the Whitfields' love for luxury. He grew up climbing trees, helping Mark fix deck railings, and raking leaves every fall until his cheeks were red from the wind. He was grounded. He had empathy. And he loved Abigail deeply. I never wanted to be the reason he struggled in his marriage. So I swallowed the little insults, the side comments, the smirks. But that morning at the bank had opened something in me I hadn't realized had been closed. Maybe I'd let myself be underestimated for too long. Maybe I'd let people wrap my life in a story that wasn't true just because I didn't feel the need to correct them. I drove home, slowly passing through downtown Janesville. The bakery had a line out the door, steam clouds billowing every time someone opened the entrance. A few kids were throwing snowballs in Courthouse Park. Life moved the same as it always did. Steady, familiar. When I turned onto my street, the outline of my house came into view, blanketed by last night's snow. The same front porch Mark rebuilt with his hands. The same maple tree Michael climbed as a boy. Inside the house felt warm and full, even though I lived alone. I hung up my coat, took off my boots, and made myself a cup of tea. As the kettle hissed, I replayed the moment at the bank again, the Whitfield smirks dissolving, their eyes widening. They would not let it go. People like them never do. And I had no idea then just how quickly they would circle back into my life, smiling wider than ever, pretending nothing had happened, while planning something far more dangerous than insults. What happened at that bank wasn't the end of anything. It was the catalyst for everything that came next. By the time evening settled in, the air in Janesville had turned brittle, the kind of cold that crawls through window frames, no matter how well you insulate. I wrapped myself in the old quilt Mark's mother had made us as a wedding gift and sat at the kitchen table staring at the steam rising from my bowl of vegetable soup. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and I found myself thinking about the long path that had led to that moment in the bank, and why I had never told anyone about the money. It wasn't shame. It wasn't secrecy. It was something much simpler. Mark and I never saw our savings as a trophy. We saw it as a cushion, a safety net, a future. The value wasn't in the number, it was in what it meant. Years of sacrifice. Years of climbing ladders in the dead of winter, sanding floors until our backs ached, and choosing necessity over luxury every single time. I could still picture Mark standing in one of the first houses we flipped in Beloit. The roof leaked, half the wiring was outdated, and the walls had stains we could never quite identify. But Mark just put his hands on his hips, smiled at me, and said, "Give us 6 months. We'll make this place shine." And we did. Not because we were wealthy, but because we knew how to work. We knew how to stretch a dollar, how to repair instead of replace, how to choose promise over perfection. We bought properties slowly, one at a time. Nothing flashy. A small ranch home in Milton. A duplex near Madison that needed new siding. A little yellow house by the lake in Edgerton that had good bones beneath the peeling paint. We fixed them, rented them, sold them, saved. Every project added a little more to the pot. It wasn't luck. It wasn't inheritance. It was grit, old, stubborn Midwest grit. But Mark died before he could enjoy any of it. I remember sitting beside him in the hospital, the beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic, the way his hand felt too light in mine. He squeezed my fingers once, just once, and said, "Take care of yourself, Helen. Don't be afraid to live." Those words stayed with me more than anything else he ever said. After the funeral, after the casseroles and the condolences, after the last neighbor left and the house fell silent, I made myself a promise, whatever he left behind, I'd protect it. The money wasn't just money, it was Mark. That's why I'd placed it carefully into investments, choosing stability over risk. I learned about interest rates, long-term accounts, and how to keep things organized. I didn't flaunt any of it. I didn't want to. The people who mattered, Mark Michael, already knew my worth. And the people who didn't, well, nothing I said would change their minds. But watching the Whitfields' faces fall inside that bank awakened something in me, something I'd forgotten. Dignity, not pride, not ego, just the quiet understanding that I had nothing to apologize for. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I expected a robocall or a wrong number, but when I glanced at the screen, my heart tugged. It was Michael. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice warm like always. "You busy?" "Just having dinner," I said. "Everything okay?" There was a brief pause. "Did you happen to see Abigail's parents today?" I smiled dryly. "You could say that." "Oh boy," he sighed. "They called us this afternoon, sounded rattled." "Mom, what happened?" I considered telling him everything, word for word, expression for expression. But Michael had always been the peacemaker. Even as a boy, he tried to smooth things over when others clashed. I didn't want to feed any tension between him and Abigail, so I kept it simple. "They made an assumption," I said, and it turned out to be wrong. "About what?" "About me." Another pause. "Mom? Did they say something hurtful?" "They usually do," I replied calmly, "but it's nothing I can't handle." Michael exhaled heavily, the kind of sigh you give when you're torn between loyalty and frustration. "I'm sorry, Mom. They shouldn't treat you like that." "It's all right," I said, even though I wasn't sure it was. Before hanging up, he added softly, "I love you, Mom, and I'm proud of you, no matter what they think." After the call ended, I sat staring at the dark window, seeing my reflection faintly in the glass, the lines on my face, the gray in my hair, the quiet strength in my eyes. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was awake. Awake to how much space I had allowed others to take in my life simply by staying silent. The next morning, as I shoveled the thin layer of snow from my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Whitfields were not done with me. People like them aren't humbled easily. They regroup, they reassess, they find new angles. Sure enough, that afternoon I got a message from Abigail, a sugar-coated text dripping with sweetness she'd never shown me before. "Hi, Helen. Thinking of you today. Maybe we can grab coffee this weekend. I'd love to spend more time together." It was the first time she had suggested spending time with me alone. The message didn't feel kind. It felt strategic. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I put my phone down, walked to the front porch, and looked out at the neighborhood. Kids were sledding down the hill across the street. A neighbor waved while carrying groceries. Life went on steady and familiar. And yet, beneath that calm, I felt a shift, tiny, like the first crack in a lake's frozen surface. The Whitfields had finally seen something they never expected, a version of me that didn't fit their narrative. And I knew with a certainty that surprised me that this was only the beginning of their change in behavior. People who rely on power don't react well when they realize they never had any. Abigail didn't wait long after that text message to follow up. The next morning, while I was wiping down the kitchen counters after breakfast, my phone buzzed again. This time, she added a cheerful note that didn't sound anything like her. "Just checking in. Let me know when you're free. Mom and Dad send their love, too." Their love? The same love they used to wrap their judgment in. I set the phone down and let out a small sigh. People don't transform overnight. The Whitfields weren't suddenly filled with affection, they were fishing. And for the first time, they seemed aware they had miscalculated. That on its own was almost amusing. Still, I wasn't going to ignore Abigail. She was my daughter-in-law, and despite everything, I wanted peace for Michael. So I agreed to meet her for coffee at a small cafe in downtown Janesville. The Cozy Cup was one of those warm, familiar places with mismatched mugs and a chalkboard menu that always smudged. I arrived early, sat by the window, and watched cars pass through the slush outside. Abigail walked in a few minutes later, wearing an expensive wool coat that didn't match the weather. She smiled too brightly and hugged me with an enthusiasm she'd never shown before. "There you are," she said. "I'm so glad we could do this." She ordered a vanilla latte, extra foam of course, and sat across from me. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked downward just for a second, like she was trying to gather courage. Or rehearsing a script. So she began folding her hands neatly on the table Mom and Dad mentioned they ran into you at the bank. I stirred my tea slowly. They did. They said they didn't realize you were doing so well. She let out a high, nervous laugh. I guess none of us did. I didn't respond. Silence has a way of revealing things. Abigail swallowed. They feel awful, you know. They think they might have offended you somehow. Somehow. As if the years of Diggs' comments and smirks had been accidents. "I'm fine," I said, "but thank you for telling me." She brightened, relieved I hadn't pushed. "Good, I'm really glad. I just want us all to get along better. You mean a lot to Michael. And to me, too." That last part hung in the air like perfume, fragrant but artificial. Before I could reply, she leaned in slightly. Mom and Dad were also thinking, maybe we could all have dinner together in Milwaukee next weekend, at Birch and Vine. They'd love to treat you. Birch and Vine was one of the priciest restaurants in Milwaukee. Abigail knew it. The Whitfields definitely knew it. And this was no olive branch, it was bait. I shook my head gently. "That's thoughtful, but I don't think I'm up for a long drive next weekend." She blinked, not expecting me to decline. "Oh? Well, maybe the weekend after." "I'll let you know," I said, keeping my tone warm but firm. Abigail fidgeted, then plastered on another smile. "Sure, of course." The conversation drifted after that small talk about Michael's work, the cold snap coming next week, and how quickly spring fills the Rock River with melting ice. But her performance was slipping. There were moments when her face sagged with worry, when she chewed the inside of her cheek the way she did when she was anxious. The Whitfields weren't trying to build a relationship. They were trying to regain control. After we said our goodbyes, I watched Abigail's car speed off toward the nicer side of town. I sat there for a while longer, hands wrapped around my warm mug, listening to the clatter of dishes behind the counter. The truth settled into me like the weight of a heavy blanket. The bank moment had shaken them. They now knew I wasn't the fragile, needy mother-in-law they imagined. But instead of respecting me, they were repositioning themselves, adjusting their approach. People like them don't admit mistakes. They re-strategize. That evening, another unexpected thing happened. Michael showed up unannounced. I heard his truck before I saw him. He always parked slightly crooked, like he never quite learned the art of straightening out on the second try. He came in with a gust of cold air and brushed snow off his shoulders. "Mom," he said, breathless, "can we talk?" I led him into the living room where the soft glow of my table lamp made the space feel warm despite the chill outside. He sat on the couch, leaned his elbows on his knees, and rubbed his forehead. "I don't know what's going on," he said. "But Abigail's been acting strange. And her parents, well, they're being overly nice. I feel like I'm missing something." I considered how much to tell him. He loved Abigail. And love makes people blind in the places they most want to see clearly. But I also owed him honesty. "They made assumptions about me," I said gently, "and those assumptions got corrected." He frowned. "Is this about money?" "It's about respect," I replied. Michael looked away, jaw tightening. "They should have known better." "You're the hardest working person I've ever known." That warmed something inside me. "Thank you, honey." He hesitated. "Mom? Did they ask you anything about lending or helping them out?" "Not yet," I said, "but I think they might." Michael sighed again. "I don't want you getting dragged into anything, and I don't want Abigail pressuring you." I placed my hand on his. "I can handle myself." He nodded, but worry still clouded his face. He stayed a little longer, helping me bring in more firewood before heading home. As I watched his truck disappear down the street, I thought about how life has a way of revealing true character when money enters the picture. And the Whitfields had just discovered that the story they believed, the one where I was helpless, ordinary beneath them, was a lie. Their sudden kindness wasn't kindness at all. It was panic wearing a polite smile. And I knew deep in my bones that their next move was already in motion. Over the next week, the Whitfields' sudden friendliness began spreading like a draft through the cracks of my quiet life. Not cold enough to shiver, but unmistakable an unwanted breeze that kept slipping in no matter how often I closed the windows. They called Michael more often. Abigail sent cheerful texts that sounded nothing like the daughter-in-law I had known for years. And then, just as I expected, their true intentions finally surfaced. It happened on a Thursday evening. The sun had already dipped past the horizon, turning the snow in my front yard a soft blue. I was finishing up washing dishes when my phone buzzed. It was Michael. "Mom, he said the moment I answered, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." I dried my hands with a towel. "All right. What's going on?" He hesitated, breathing shakily. "Did you, by any chance, offer to help Abigail's parents buy a place in Door County?" I froze. Door County. Now that made everything perfectly clear. That was where wealthy Wisconsin families like to own cabins, those expensive, polished retreats with cedar decks and lake views that cost more than my entire street. It was a status symbol, a bragging right away to say, "We've made it." And the Whitfields wanted one badly. "No," I said firmly. "I didn't offer anything." Michael exhaled, relieved and frustrated all at once. That's what I thought. "They told Abigail's aunt you were thinking of helping them invest in a cabin, that you had expressed interest." I nearly laughed. Expressed interest in what? Giving my money away. He didn't laugh. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. "Mom," he continued, quietly, "did they ask you for money?" "Not directly," I said, but I knew it was coming. Michael groaned. "Unbelievable. I can't believe they'd drag you into something like this." "Oh, I can," I replied. "They've underestimated me for years. This is simply the next step." He didn't respond at first. I could hear him pacing through his living room, the faint creak of hardwood under his boots. "I don't want them using you," he said finally. "I don't want Abigail pressuring you either." "Michael," I said gently, "you didn't marry your in-laws. You married Abigail. She has to make her own choices." He hesitated. "I'm not sure she is." My heart pinched. Abigail loved Michael, I knew that. But love doesn't erase influence, and the Whitfields' influence ran deep. They had shaped her worldview, her values, and apparently her ambitions. "Did Abigail ask you about it directly?" I asked. There was a pause. She hinted he said, "Asked if you'd ever helped us financially or planned to in the future." I told her no, that you've always been responsible and private with your money. "And what did she say?" She said maybe you'd want to be part of something exciting. Something for the family. I let out a bitter sigh. A cabin isn't for the family. It's for them. Michael didn't argue. He knew it as well as I did. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with the overhead light humming above me, the shadows of steam rising from the tea I hadn't touched. My hands felt warm around the mug, but my chest felt tight. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the disrespect. It was about how effortlessly people could twist narratives when they wanted something. A few minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires on snow outside. I stood up, peered out the front window, and saw Abigail's familiar SUV pulling into my driveway. A knot formed in my stomach. She never came over unannounced. She stepped out, adjusting her coat, her breath visible in the cold air. When I opened the door, she flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Helen," she said brightly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I said, even though she absolutely was. "Can I come in?" I nodded and led her to the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch like someone preparing to make a presentation. Her eyes scanned the room, something she always did, taking in the old furniture, the crocheted blankets, the modest decor. But today, there was something else layered behind her gaze calculation. "I just wanted to check on you," she began. "You seemed a little distant at coffee the other day." "I was fine," I replied calmly. "Just thinking." She smiled thinly. "About the bank." I didn't respond. She didn't need me to. Abigail inched forward. "Mom and Dad were really impressed by how well you've managed everything. Honestly, they've been talking about it nonstop." "I'm sure they have," I said. Her cheeks tightened. She glanced down, then back up. "They were wondering." Well, we were all wondering if you've ever thought about investing in real estate again. Something big. Something special. There it was. Door County, written all over her face. I folded my hands in my lap. "What exactly are you asking me, Abigail?" She swallowed, gathering courage. "There's this cabin well more like a property that Mom and Dad want to buy. It's beautiful, right by the water, but they need a little help with the down payment. Not a lot. Just enough to secure it. They said it could be a family place, a place we all use." "Family," I repeated softly. "Would the deed be under their name?" She hesitated, for now. "For now," I echoed. She rushed ahead. "But you'd be welcome any time, and Michael would love it. He's always talked about having a place up there." I let the silence stretch as long as I needed, long enough for her smile to wobble. "Abigail," I said calmly, "why would you think I'd fund your parents' cabin?" Her face flushed. I didn't say fund, just help. With money. Well, yes. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment settle. Every dime I have, Abigail, came from decades of hard work. From me and your father-in-law. We didn't inherit anything. We built it. I know, she whispered, ashamed. And I didn't save that money so someone else could use it to upgrade their lifestyle. Abigail's shoulders sagged. She looked like a child caught doing something she shouldn't. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I just thought you might want to be part of it." "I already have a home," I replied softly, "and that's all I need." She nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes, not from heartbreak, but from embarrassment. She had never been told no, and certainly not by the woman she thought was beneath her. When she left, I closed the door gently and stood in the quiet hallway, the weight of the encounter settling deep in my chest. I felt neither triumph nor anger, just clarity. The Whitfield scheme had finally surfaced, and now that it had, there was no going back. Their desperation would only grow, and I would be ready. For the next 2 days, my house felt strangely quiet, as if even the walls were waiting for what would come next. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the neighborhood in a thick white blanket that muffled every sound. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside me something had shifted into place. A decision, a certainty, a line drawn. I didn't rush into action. I shoveled the driveway, bought groceries, fed the birds, kept my routines steady. But every small movement was guided by an understanding I hadn't fully faced before. If I didn't set boundaries, the Whitfields would keep pushing and pushing until something broke. And I refused to let it be me. By Saturday morning, I had made up my mind. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and called my financial advisor in Madison. Her name was Amanda Sharp, trustworthy, level-headed. She had helped me manage my investments for years, always with the same quiet respect that reminded me of Mark. I'd like to finalize the trust we discussed, I told her, for my son and future grandchildren. She was silent for half a second, surprised maybe, but supportive. Of course, Helen. We can set up an irrevocable trust. Once it's locked, no one else can touch it. Not even you. That's exactly what I want, I said. Do you want Abigail included as a beneficiary? No, I said simply. Only Michael, and eventually any children they have. She didn't question it. Understood. I'll draw up the documents and arrange for a notary. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Strength. The kind that comes not from fighting, but from finally protecting the small, sacred things that matter. That afternoon, I sent out a group text to Abigail, Michael, and her parents. I'm making coffee tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'd like everyone to come by. There's something important I need to share. The replies came quickly. From Abigail, of course. Looking forward to it. From her mother, we'll be there. From her father, sounds good. Helen, and from Michael, Mom, everything, okay? I sent him a short answer. Yes, I just need to talk to all of you. The next day arrived colder than expected. A lake effect gust had swept down from the north, leaving a glitter of ice along my porch railings. I straightened the living room, set out a plate of cookies, and lit the small lamp in the corner. It always made the room feel warm, no matter how frigid the weather outside. At exactly 2 p.m., the Whitfields arrived. They came in with polite smiles and over-eager cheer, a performance even before coats were removed. Abigail hugged me tightly, her perfume too strong for the small hallway. Her parents followed, with the sort of polished politeness they used at charity events. Michael arrived last, brushing snow off his shoulders and meeting my eyes with a glance that asked if he needed to be worried. Come in, I said gently. Let's sit. We gathered in the living room, the Whitfields perched like guests, expecting a presentation, their expressions curious but confident, as if whatever I was about to say would somehow benefit them. I poured coffee for everyone, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap. I want to clear the air, I began. There's been confusion lately, about money, about intentions, about what I do or don't plan to do with what I've saved. Abigail shifted uncomfortably. Her mother straightened her back. Her father crossed one leg over the other. I've heard from multiple people, I continued, that I supposedly planned to help with a cabin in Door County, that I had expressed interest, and that it was being talked about as if I had already offered something. Abigail's cheeks flushed instantly. Helen, I raised one hand. Let me finish. She quieted. I want to make this very clear. I never offered anyone anything. No investments, no loans, no contributions. Mrs. Whitfield's expression tightened. Well, we must have misunderstood. You didn't misunderstand, I said calmly. You assumed. Silence. Heavy, warm, uncomfortable. Michael looked from me to Abigail, his jaw clenched. I've spent my entire life being modest, I continued. I grew up that way. I raised my son that way. And I don't regret it. But somewhere along the line, some of you decided modesty meant weakness, or lack, or that I would simply hand over what I worked for. I looked at Abigail's parents, then at Abigail herself. That won't be happening. Her mother blinked. Helen, no one was trying to force. You were trying to benefit, I corrected. She swallowed hard. I reached down beside my chair and picked up a folder the documents Amanda had sent over that morning. I've placed the entirety of my savings, I said, all $1.2 million into an irrevocable trust. Abigail inhaled sharply. For Michael, I continued, and his future children. No one else. Her father leaned forward. I'm sure there's a way to structure it so that… No, I said again, firm but calm, there isn't. And even if there were, I wouldn't. Abigail looked down at her hands. Her mother stared at the coffee table. Her father's jaw twitched. Michael exhaled long and slow. His shoulders lowered relief, gratitude, and something like pride. I softened my voice and looked directly at Abigail. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm protecting my family. And I'm setting boundaries that should have been there long ago. Her eyes brimmed with tears, not the angry kind, but the humbling kind. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't realize how it sounded. I didn't realize what we were doing. Yes, I said gently. You did. But you can choose to do better now. Her mother stiffened as if embarrassed her daughter had been scolded. But she didn't speak. Neither did her husband. There was nothing left to say. After they left, Michael stayed behind. He hugged me tighter than he had in years. You didn't have to do that, Mom, he whispered. Yes, I did, I replied. Because people treat you the way you allow them to. He nodded, quiet, thoughtful. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world looked clean again. For the first time in a long time, so did my life. After everyone left that afternoon, the house felt strangely warm, not because of the furnace humming through the vents, but because something inside me had finally settled. For years, I had been walking around with a quiet weight on my chest, the kind that grows heavier each time you let someone talk over you or decide who you are without ever asking. But now, the heaviness was gone. In its place was something lighter, clearer. A kind of peace I hadn't felt since before Mark passed. Michael stayed a while longer, helping me put away the coffee cups and straighten the living room. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, steady, familiar. The way silence feels when two people understand one another without words. After he left, I stood at the living room window and watched his truck disappear down the snow-lined street. The sky was turning a soft lavender, the kind of winter dusk that only lasts a few minutes before the world goes dark. I pulled the curtains closed and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had done it. I had stood up not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. And now the true work would begin healing the parts of me that had been quiet for too long and strengthening the parts of my family that still needed guidance. Later that evening, my phone chimed. It was Abigail. Thank you for today. I know it wasn't easy. I needed to hear it. I'll do better. I stared at her message for a long time before responding. Not because I doubted her sincerity, tears don't lie, at least not the way hers had fallen earlier, but because change is hard, even when you mean it. Especially when you mean it. "You're welcome," I finally typed, "one step at a time. We can rebuild, but it starts with honesty." She responded almost immediately. "I want that, truly." I believed her not completely, but enough. Enough to give her room to grow. Enough to let her create a new space between us, one grounded in respect rather than performance. Enough to let life give her a second chance. The next morning, the world outside looked different. The sun was brighter, the air a little less sharp. A fresh layer of snow covered the yard soft and untouched. I bundled up, stepped outside, and shoveled the walkway again, even though it hardly needed it. The rhythm of the shovel scraping over concrete grounded me the way simple chores always had. Halfway through, I heard footsteps crunching on the sidewalk. I looked up to see my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, waving at me from across the street. "Morning, Helen," she called out. "Cold one today." "Cold enough," I replied with a smile. As she walked on, I realized how grateful I was for this place, this quiet street, this slow rhythm of life, this Wisconsin familiarity that made even the hard moments feel manageable. The Whitfields didn't understand this world. They didn't understand that value isn't determined by size or cost or shine. It's determined by how much of your heart you put into something. After finishing the walkway, I went back inside, hung up my coat, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat in the rocking chair in the living room, the one Mark used to claim as his own, and looked around at the home we'd built together. The walls, the floors, the pictures, the quilt on the back of the couch, all of it was a reflection of a life lived with integrity. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael. "Mom, I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you, and I love you." I pressed a hand to my chest. Love at 63 feels different than love at 33. It sinks deeper, settles more firmly, becomes a kind of anchor. I typed back, "I love you too, sweetheart. We're going to be okay." A few hours later, as the day warmed slightly, I sat down at the dining table with the trust documents Amanda had prepared. I read them carefully, page by page. They were clear, final, and binding. Exactly what I wanted. Exactly what my husband would have wanted. I signed them all with steady hands. When I finished, I placed the folder neatly inside my desk drawer and closed it softly. The weight of finality didn't frighten me. It comforted me. My legacy was protected. My son's future was safe. And no one, not the Whitfields, not money, not assumptions, could touch it. That evening, Abigail texted again. "Is it okay if I stop by later this week? I want to talk. Not about money, about us." I wrote back, "Yes, we can talk." And I meant it. I didn't want bitterness to live in my home. I didn't want resentment to settle in my son's marriage. Forgiveness isn't about letting people walk over you. It's about refusing to let their mistakes define your own heart. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the snowflakes drifting gently through the porch light. The world looked clean, quiet, simple. This was my life. Simple, yes, but strong. Rooted. Honest. And I finally understood something I should have known all along. People may underestimate you when you live quietly, but they never forget you once you finally speak. Before going to bed, I turned off the lights and whispered a small thank you to Mark, to the life we built, to the strength I didn't know I still had, and to the truth that had finally set me free. To anyone listening to my story now, I hope you remember this. Hold your worth close. Speak your truth when the moment calls for it. And never ever let someone else decide your value. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. and stay with me for the next one.